Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Z and J.W podcast. I'm J.W. Stewart, a veteran broadcaster and journalist with nearly 30 years' experience. I've worked at ESPN and NBC, and now I teach at the University of New Haven.
And I'm Sheahon Zenger. I started my career as a football coach at Drake, Kansas State, South Florida, and Wyoming before becoming the director of athletics at Illinois State University, the University of Kansas, and now the University of New Haven. And this is the Dr. Z and J.W podcast.
And hi, and welcome to the Dr. Z and J.W podcast. Once again, everybody, presented by our sponsor, the Pink Clover Foundation. And thanks to everyone tuning in today across all of our social media platforms. As always, our podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. J.W. Stewart alongside our New Haven Athletic Director, Dr. Z, Sheahon Zenger. Dr. Z, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's a little bit humid here in West Haven, Connecticut today. It's been raining off and on for 3 or 4 days. We need the rain, but a little bit on the humid side.
Yeah, it's going to be hot and humid here as well in Burlington, where I live. But as we discussed the other day, humidity here in Connecticut's a little different story than the humidity you've dealt with for years in Texas and Kansas. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'll take the lower temperatures here and living by the shoreline. It's kind of a refreshing feel to it. I've also learned during the winter that the shoreline helps the snow melt. So right now I'll take those trade-offs.
Yeah. I think you guys along the shoreline live in the best area of the state, having that temperate climate, a little bit more temperate than it is here inland, about an hour north of where you are. Dr. Z, we're looking forward to a great show today. We're talking baseball today with the Major League Baseball season a little less than 2 weeks away. Our guest today is Paul Severino, who is the television play-by-play voice of the Miami Marlins on Fox Sports Florida. Summer training, if you want to call it, or spring training 2.0 is already going on across the country. Paul and I used to work together at ESPN, and then Paul went on to MLB Network before landing a great job with the Marlins. He's just getting ready to begin his 3rd year as the play-by-play voice of the Marlins, and we'll bring Paul out in a few minutes. But we mentioned we're talking baseball today, and Dr. Z, you actually had a chance to go to a baseball game live and in person not too long ago. Tell us about that.
It was the New Britain Bees, which is, a half-hour drive from here. And being new to the state, I'm just kind of taking in all the sights and scenes that I can. My wife and I and family have been to, Mystic and of course, on our way over to Newport, which obviously is in Rhode Island. But so those are the kind of things we're doing. And a friend offered us tickets to go watch the New Britain Bees. His brother is the head coach of the Bees, and 2 of our young men from the Charger family are on that team. Andrew Kane, our first baseman, and Matt Chamberlain. But Matt Chamberlain no longer can play since he signed with the Cardinals, which is something to be proud of. But Matt just loves to play, and he was at the game and sitting behind the dugout and came up. We chit-chatted at a distance. But yeah, we got to go. It's a beautiful AA stadium that now is home to a college summer team. Great fan base. Without stealing all your questions, I hadn't been to a ball game of any kind since a softball game here on March the 8th, I think it was. And that was, it was all socially distanced. I didn't get within 10 feet of anybody. And just to sit there with my wife and daughter was a joy, really.
How many people were in the stadium? Could you tell?
Oh, heck, I'd be guessing. The stadium's a beautiful, big stadium, bigger than most college stadiums. And I would guess, I'd be wrong, but I guess it might seat 3,000 to 5,000. Mm-hmm. And I would say there were maybe 1,500 people there, and but spread out. So it looked really, really populated. But, the scoreboard, whoever's running the scoreboard, antics and things like that, it had very much the feel of a minor league game. And you could just tell people were glad to be outside and watching something. They were cheering like crazy, and so were we. And Andrew Kane had a phenomenal game. I think he ended up being voted Player of the Week for the league, and he is their DH that game. And it was just a nice outing for the family. Not only have we not been to ball games, haven't been to a movie, just like everybody else. Haven't been to, a play. Haven't been to a concert. Haven't been to anything. And you start to become used to the lifestyle we have of, family dinners at home. Now we can go eat outside and inside in some places, but we'd never go inside. And you start to feel like this is normal almost until you go to something like that game, and it brings you back to what used to be.
Yeah, credit to the New Britain Bees. They are the only game in town right now here in the Connecticut area. I mean, we had the Travelers Championship, which came through a couple of weeks ago, and no fans, of course. But the New Britain Bees to be able to have fans, and I think 1,500 fans is the max that they're allowed in that stadium. Yeah. But for people, for them to be, on the map, because normally the Bees would not get a lot of attention. New Britain has an interesting history here in Connecticut, especially with baseball. Right behind where that stadium is, and you probably saw it, is a place called Beehive Field. It's an older stadium, and the New Britain Red Sox used to play there many years ago. They had one of their minor league teams there. When New Britain Stadium opened in 96 or 97, I believe it was 96. I was actually there, Dr. Z, the day that opened. I was working in newspapers in New York. I was working at the Poughkeepsie Journal, and the Bees opened the stadium. They weren't called the Bees back then. They were the New Britain Rock Cats, and they were a AA affiliate of the Minnesota Twins. And they hosted an exhibition game against the Minnesota Twins, the big ball club, coming out of spring training back in 96. And our connection in New York is we had a local kid on the minor league team. So I went to cover the team in the stadium the first year it opened. And the New Britain Rock Cats were there for a while, up until 2015, 2016, I want to say. And the team moved to Hartford. They're now the Hartford Yard Goats. Okay. The New Britain Bees came in. They were an independent minor league team for a couple of years, played in the Atlantic League, so not affiliated with Major League Baseball. And then this is their first year of being in the Futures Collegiate Baseball League for the college students, which is probably a better sell. I mean, you have if you look at their roster, I took a look at it the other day, every player on that New Britain Bees roster is from Connecticut or goes to college in Connecticut.
Yeah.
So it's pretty simple when you want to attract fans, because you have their family and friends who can come see right away.
No, it was, my wife even said she really enjoyed the game. It almost preferred that level of baseball over some others. And there was an excitement to it. There's something about college sports and high school sports that's a little more spontaneous, and families being there, get into it, and you could just feel it.
Yep. A little bit more of what sports is supposed to be, right? The true spirit of competition, right? That's exactly what we're looking for. Well, certainly our guest today is missing baseball as well. We're all missing baseball. I'm a Red Sox fan. Dr. Z, you're a Royals fan. We're missing baseball, but our guest today is Paul Severino, and I want to bring him out from the green room here because he's missing baseball on a much different level, because he is the play-by-play TV voice for the Miami Marlins on Fox Sports Florida. And Paul joins us now here on the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast. Paul, it's great to see you. How are you?
I am great, gentlemen. Thanks for having me, J.W. It's good to work with you again, actually, I guess in some form or fashion. So good to be back with you.
Absolutely. So I think this is the first show you and I have done since like 2010, 2011, somewhere in there.
It was my first ESPN news show. I know that.
Yep. Yeah. Full disclosure here to Dr. Z and our audience. Paul and I worked together at ESPN. We had a chance to work on ESPN News together, on ESPN America as well, the international show that went overseas to the UK and Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, which was fun. We had a chance to launch that back in the day. You, me, and Michael Kim were involved with that. So
we did not have to learn all the languages. We spoke in English.
No.
That was.
Yeah, they wanted everything in English, which was great because I can't speak any other languages. Paul has an interesting story. We'll get to the Marlins in just a minute, but Paul, you're one of the few on-air people that I know in ESPN's history that actually grew up in Bristol. Tell us about your childhood growing up in Bristol and how you ended up getting to ESPN.
Yeah, it was crazy. I think a lot of people work their butts off in their careers and bounce around the country to end up at ESPN and hopefully stay there for a long time, if not the rest of their career. And I was the dope that started there. It was my first paid job out of college was ESPN. But Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Bristol, and I always liked sports. I was never any like really good, a couple of little league all-star teams or whatever it was. But, you know, I played baseball and basketball in high school. That was the end of my playing days, but I knew I wanted to be around sports somehow. And I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old at the time. And we had a family friend who was a little older, and I said something about, what do you thinking about studying in college? And he said, communications. I said, what the heck is that? He goes, well, you know, all those guys that announce games, that's what they do. And I never clicked. I'm 6 or 7 or 8 years old. I never clicked that you could actually do that for a job and like watch sports and talk about sports. And I was into wrestling when I was a kid, so I'm always announcing my little figures or doing whatever. I was like, all right, I think I can get into that. And I have a one-track mind, so I just kind of stayed focused on that as best I could, and did whatever morning news updates I could do in high school. Went to Endicott College, and fortunately, they have a great internship program. So I did internships the January of my freshman year, the summer in between freshman and sophomore year, January of my sophomore year, worked for the TV station my junior year, and then a semester internship my senior year, and then after that, another unpaid internship, my fifth, with the New Haven County Cutters. That took me up until mid-September of 2015. I graduated in May of 2015. So I was unemployed for about 3 weeks or a month, and ESPN called. They were starting this new thing, something that never will ever catch on, watching sports on your phone.
Yeah, never.
That'll never catch on. So they were starting this mobile ESPN thing, and they were looking for entry level type dopes like me to write headlines and do stuff like that. And that was my first step into ESPN.
I don't mean to correct you. You said 2015. I think you mean 2005. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Close enough. It's been a while. I'm getting older now.
Yeah. So you were at ESPN for a few years, and then you went on to MLB Network. I actually have never had a chance to ask you to tell us this story, but how did you get the job you have now? Because there are only 30 of these jobs in the country. It's one of the hardest jobs to get in any industry. You know, broadcasting is very competitive.
Yeah.
How did you get to be the play-by-play TV voice of the Marlins on Fox Sports Florida? Tell us that whole story, what happened behind the scenes.
I think it's there's a lot of luck involved and timing involved and all of that kind of stuff. You know, when I was growing up, what I wanted to do for a living was I wanted to be the voice of the Yankees. And I actually told that to my boss at ESPN when I first got there in the first few weeks. He said, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I want to be the voice of the Yankees. And he's like, wait a second. Now I'm writing headlines at the time. He says, wait a second, you want to be on camera? I said, yeah, I guess, yeah. And so he said, all right, well, why don't you start doing some highlights for us? I said, all right, that's fine. It couldn't get all the big guns. J.W. Stewart wasn't coming downstairs to read highlights, but let's get these schmucks to do it. So, you know, doing highlights on the phone thing or whatever, and then that turned into more and more highlights, and then that turned into some other stuff at ESPN. So I always wanted to do baseball play-by-play. Again, that one-track mind that I have. So when I moved from, but I love baseball, overarching, I love baseball. So when I moved from ESPN to MLB Network, I thought, all right, well, that's good. It's not that traditional path of get out of college, find a minor league job, bounce around for a few years, go from A ball to double A to triple A, much like a minor league player would do. But I was in that baseball bubble, and I hoped at some point that might lead to something, calling a few games at MLB Network, which I did. But the long roundabout way was it was right around Thanksgiving of, see if I get this year right. This was 2017. So 12 years after I graduated college. But so I had an agent when I was working at ESPN and at MLB Network. We ended up parting ways, so I had no representation, which can sometimes help you get your foot in the door different places or cut a professional tape or do whatever. But I was flying solo at the time and still am. But I had seen on Twitter that the Marlins were parting ways with their longtime TV voice, Rich Walls, who I knew kind of in a professional way obviously think he had done a terrific job with the Marlins, and talked to him a lot at MLB Network. He was always a guest on the show. The utmost respect for him. Things change. I'm sure I'll, part ways with the team at some point. I hope that's not for a while, but it's part of the gig. So I had seen that he had, was no longer with the club. And I said, oh, geez, now I'm still under contract for another couple of years at MLB Network. I had just signed a 3-year deal. I was finishing the first year of that deal. And I always had a great relationship with the bosses at MLB Network, and they knew what my passions were. And, I was tried to do anything and everything that they asked me to do. So I was hoping if I ever needed a favor, that they would allow me to do it. And so I just said, hey, this job opened up. It's a job and a team and a place I think I'm ready for and everything else. Can I pursue it? And they said, sure, let us know how it goes. I said, all right. So I guess was smart enough to have already kind of cut together a tape from some of the games that I had done. So if one of these things ever opened up, it was just, click send and fire it over. So I did that. And again, it was Florida. I happened to know a few people who had worked at Fox Sports Florida in different realms. So I said, hey, who do I need to get a hold of? So I got email addresses, and I sent the tape through a YouTube link, I guess, but through to them. And I said, okay, so that's like the Fox Sports Florida people. And then I thought to myself, all right, if I want this to happen, I got to figure out, I've made some good connections in my time at MLB Network. Who do I know that can help? Well, and by the way, when I say help, I don't mean, hey, Joe Schmo, get me the job or else. I mean like, hey, can you vouch for me so that when this person is getting 1,000 tapes, that they just stop and look at mine and at least say, he's not our guy, but at least they watched it to know, as opposed to it's just lost in the shuffle. And I was fortunate to kind of know a lot of the right people that would help get my tape seen. So sent it along to the Fox Sports Florida people. One of the folks so here's the regionals, Foxes, and then we call it Big Fox, was John Entz. And John Entz was like the number 2 at Fox at the time. And he was actually one of the executive producers that hired me at MLB Network. So I was able to get a hold of him and say, hey, this job is open, whatever. Can you just make sure my tape gets seen? He said, I'll do what I can. Okay. So now I've got Fox Regional. I've got Big Fox. Tony Petitti was the head of MLB Network for a while. He then went to go work under the commissioner, Rob Manfred. And I'm thinking, few people are better. He knows TV. He knows baseball. I reached out to him, and he's such a busy guy. If you talk to him for more than 10 seconds, it's a long conversation. And I was on the phone with him for like 20 minutes. And he said, if you think you're ready, I'll say what I can to the right people and make the phone calls for you. I said, that'd be great. So now I've got Fox Regional, Big Fox, and Tony Petitti. And then I said, all right, if I really want to double down, triple down, quadruple down on this, I sent Harold Reynolds, good friend of mine at MLB Network, sent him a text. I said, hey, can we grab lunch sometime this week? He said, yeah, what do you need? I said, I got a question for you. And he said, let's go to Chili's right now. I was like, okay, it's 9:30 on a Tuesday night. I said, okay, sure. So I go, Heather, my wife, Heather, I got to go meet Harold right now. Go there, tell him about the job. I wanted this, that, and the other. Now, at the time, this was 2017, Derek Jeter had just been part of the group that purchased the Marlins. Derek Jeter had just gotten married, and there were maybe 50 people at the wedding. Harold Reynolds was one of those 50 people. So we're at Chili's, and we're eating nachos. And I said, I tell him about the job. He goes, well, what do you want me to do? Text Derek Jeter? And I said, Harold, that's why we're here. Could you do me a solid? So he goes, oh, yeah, sure. So he sends I've been working with Paul Severino. He's a good guy. Da, 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 da. So I don't know how much of any of that helped. At the end of the day, all I know is that it got me into the final group of however many, 5, 10 people that they auditioned. So I went down to Florida and auditioned, and 3-4 weeks later ended up getting the job. And that's the long story of how it worked out. I think it was, like I said, it was a little bit of luck. It was a little bit of timing. Again, the people at MLB Network were great. doing whatever that they could to help. Like I said, I had 2 years left on my contract, and you know, it's never a great idea to break contracts. But this was one of those things, kind of staying in the baseball family, knowing hopefully that I had done everything that I could for them at the time. I still try to stay involved with them as best I can as whatever sort of correspondent. And it's a great group over there that I miss, but they were great to me. They were great for me. And I appreciate them allowing me to pursue that.
Paul, there's several things that jump out to me as you tell that story. That's a fascinating story. And one of my roles here is to always bring it back to, if we have students or student athletes that are watching, or heck, just curious alumni, and we have a viewership of folks who aren't connected to UNH as well. I think it's important to point out that you're unique, and I had a similar path as you, and that you knew what you wanted to do when you were young. There aren't many people who have that gift of knowing, hey, here's what I want to do, and then you stay on it.
Right.
So I just want to point it out to the young people. You're unique in that regard. Don't feel bad if you didn't know what you wanted to do when you were 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. But the thing that you did that it needs to be pointed out to all these young people, you prepared. Whether that be internships or the things you did, and what you knowing what you wanted to do at a young age, me knowing what I want to do at a young age, you prepared early. Mm-hmm. Whether you prepare early, mid, or late, you got to prepare. You got to do the internships. You got to get the things. You got to do the things to get your foot in the door. And I tell young people in sports management classes when I guest lecture, which is all I can do since I'm an English professor by trade, is volunteer. Volunteer. Get the opportunity first. Just get your foot in the door. They'll eventually pay you. Not much. But, you know, there's a sequence to this path. So I point that out to young people. But then there's the magic of what you described and the people you mentioned that maybe went to bat for you, you know, whatever they did. But it was your preparation that allowed you, once in the batter's box, to use a metaphor here, to get on base. You know, you got to prepare, then you know the right people, and then you got to swing at the ball and you got to hit it.
Yeah. And I think that obviously you're spot on right there. I think that, and there's so many folks that help me to prepare. And one of them is on this show right now, J.W. When I was at ESPN, and I was there for 5 total years, and I think it was into my 5th year. I was doing nothing but ESPN.com stuff and mobile ESPN stuff, and you know, they had finally, I don't know what it was, if I had finally gotten hired full time or somebody saw me do something or whatever it was, they decided to give me a shot on TV. And they said, "You're doing ESPN News." I said, "Okay, fantastic." And after the show, I went to Jerry Madelon, who was, I forget his exact title, but talent relation type guy over there. I said, "Thanks so much." I said, "It was great working with JW." And he said, "There was a reason why I put him with you, to help you through any of those, you know, tough times of doing live TV for 3 hours for the first time in my life." And, you know, there's so many little experiences that you have. And I've always been, I guess, I don't know if quick learner is it, but I think you want to try to get the most out of every opportunity. And when I had the first internship, again, I was fortunate. Endicott College has 3 lined up for you. Like I said, 1 in your freshman, 1 in your sophomore, and a semester senior year. So you have 3. A lot of schools maybe do 1 or 2, but they get you going right off the bat. And again, I got lucky. And again, JW can talk to this, having worked at WVIT. That was my first internship. And that was the NBC affiliate in West Hartford. And I worked with a great group of guys. And who knows, I thought I knew what I wanted to do. But if I ended up working with a bunch of jerks who made me get them coffee every day, maybe I'm doing something else right now. But Kevin Nathan, Fred Nutter, Lou Holder, Tim Lammers, those were that first group of guys that I worked with, anchors and producers. They let me do stuff. They let me do a lot of stuff. You know, there were a couple times Kevin would do the 6 o'clock show, run home for dinner with the family, come back, and and I would see some bit of news, and I would go grab a tape that I probably wasn't supposed to be touching anything, but I'd go grab a tape and I'd cut it, and I'd say, he'd come back and say, hey, we got to get something for this. And I'd say, here, I cut it already. He's, oh my, geez, you're unbelievable. So it was great that they gave me those opportunities, and it helped to kind of feed my hunger, because it's a little bit like meeting your idol. They say you should never meet your idol because you may get let down. And it was one of those things. It was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to. And if, like I said, if it stunk, if it was not what I thought it was going to be, if it felt more like work than fun, if those guys were jerks to me, maybe it's a different story. But I was blessed with WVIT with those guys, John Pearson and Noah Finns at WTNH, and a bunch of other guys in my second internship. All the folks at I don't know exactly what it's called now, Fox Sports New England, Comcast New England, whatever they're calling it these days. But all those guys up in Burlington, Mass were fantastic. And, again, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great people along the way for long periods of time, for shorter periods of time, 3-hour blocks, JW. It's been fantastic. And there's so many people to thank for where I'm at and where I hope to continue to be.
Well, Paul is very kind. Thank you for the kind words. It was an honor to work with you.
You gave me $20. I was supposed to say it. I don't know.
It's Dr. Z. You can tell right away, if people have what it takes to make it in whatever business you're in. For us, it's broadcasting. I'm sure for you, coaching, and then athletic administration. It was easy to tell that Paul fit in and had a great future ahead of him, because even though he got to ESPN at such a young age, he was well mature beyond his years. Now, I'm sure Paul and some people who know Paul probably say, well, he's not very mature, but I say that you are. You definitely fit in. I mean, to come into ESPN, first job out of college, work your way up, that's very, very difficult to do. As you said, usually that's the last place you go, not the first place you go. And then all the things that you did after that. But I think the thing that I take away from that story you told about, from ESPN MLB to the Marlins, and Dr. Z, we've talked about this on this show many times, and we talk about it in classes. We try to teach our students and our student athletes this. And Paul, that's connections, right? I mean, the connections get you everywhere in life. And some people say, well, that's not fair, but I mean, that is just how things go. I mean, if you're going to have the opportunity to hire somebody, and it's between someone like a Paul Severino, or someone you don't know, aren't you going to go with somebody that you know? Absolutely. And you should use those connections that you've made. And in addition to Paul's preparedness, as Dr. Z pointed out, Paul, I mean, the connections that you made, and you went down the list of everyone that you talked to help you get, put you in a position to get the job. I mean, ultimately, you still had to perform at the audition and everything, but they gave you an opportunity to get there. And I'm sure that's something that was taught to you at Endicott, and probably we mentioned it at ESPN as well, because you don't get anywhere in life on your own. You need help, and that's where your connections come in.
Yeah, and it's and I learned this early from probably my Channel 30 days. It is such a small business that, it spans the country, and there's a million outlets, but at the same time, you'll bump into people along the way that you met at this golf tournament or that basketball game or whatever 15 years down the road, and it's such a small industry at the end of the day, that it's important to do that. And again, I've like I said, I've been fortunate to have a lot of people who would even send an email or make a phone call after I had worked with them years later, just say, hey, I got a question about this, or what do you think, how should I handle that, or whatever. Just kind of stay in touch with people as best you can. And also realize that you can do that for the next group of people too. I always say that if, maybe I'm not as good as it as I want to be, but people will send me oddball messages about, not this one, but can you be on my show, podcast, do whatever, that people that I don't know who they are. And, all right, maybe I'll do a few of those or whatever, but just try to be to other people what other people were to me at some point. And can't do all of them, but you want to try to chit chat with somebody. We had, I think it was last year, the year before, I had some college students come to Marlins Park, and whatever, they want to do a million of the different jobs that are around baseball. But if there were a couple of broadcasting hopefuls that were in there that they would, pull me aside and ask a couple of questions. And if you give them 5 minutes, that goes a long way. Think of yourself at 18 years old. If you were able to talk to somebody that's higher up the food chain for 5 minutes, it would be unbelievable. So, it's I don't plan on putting any of their kids through college. I got to worry about my own. But if you can give somebody 5 minutes of your time, I think that can go a long way.
There's a book written by a pretty good friend of mine named Bob Bodine. It was actually a bestseller in certain markets called The Power of Who. And there's a workbook that goes with it. And it's something it's a pretty popular book in our profession. Bob is the owner of a search firm down in the Dallas area. And now probably does more writing and speaking than he does searches. But in this book, what he asserts is that you don't get your jobs from, for instance, going to the convention and in coaching and just meeting someone. You get your jobs from the people who know you pretty well that you've already worked with. And he asks young people, middle-aged people, old people to sit down and make a list of your who, he calls it. Who do you know? And really, you start with a list of about 40 people. It doesn't take long in the business. And then you shrink it down to your team of your inner circle of 5 to 10. And you look back on the jobs you've gotten and you describe that path. It's amazing how those people connect you to the next person or the job. Now, I say that because in many ways that's humbling. When you sit in a job like you have or J.W. has or I've had, you can sit there and have an ego and say, man, I got here because of this and that. On the other hand, whether it be a higher power or people doors are open it's humbling to me that it can't be just of yourself. There's no way it would have happened like that. Fate has to play a role. The universe has to play a role in those doors opening, you being where you need to be. To talk about how small the world is, you were ripping off a list of names. No offense. It's someone I talked to on the phone last week, connected by Broccoli Rob Thompson, who's, a producer of this show. Wow. You and I have never met before, but there's a common name, and it's amazing how those things can come to be and transpire.
Yeah, like I said before, it's a small world, and it's, if we've learned anything, this is somewhat separate but also related. If we've learned anything in these last few months, we've learned to wash our hands. We've learned to respect other people's space and just try to respect other people. And I think that goes a long way in this industry that I'm in, or any industry. Just show some people that you work with or work for some respect, and that will hopefully pay off at some time later on.
Treat others as you want to be treated. I mean, that's basic as it gets. And that's up or down the ladder in the you can tell a lot about someone as to how they treat people across the framework of an organization, whether they be your superior or someone who works for you. That's important.
Yeah.
This is the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast presented by the Pink Clover Foundation. Our guest today is Paul Severino, the TV play-by-play voice for the Miami Marlins on Fox Sports Florida. Paul, you mentioned a few minutes ago, be careful about meeting your idols. You had the chance to do that. You grew up here in Connecticut, a Yankees fan. Of course, now you work for the Marlins. They're managed by Don Mattingly. The CEO and partial owner of the Marlins is Derek Jeter. What was it like? Tell us the story when you first met Don Mattingly and Derek Jeter.
Both of them are embarrassing stories, and so that'll be fun.
Embarrassing for them, right? Not for you.
Oh yeah, no, I never embarrass myself ever. So let's start with Derek Jeter. So this one, it was actually long before I started with the Marlins. I was working at MLB Network. It was my first year. It was 2011 at MLB Network, and it was toward the end of the season, so it's September. And the folks at MLB Network said, "Hey, tomorrow, instead of doing this show, we want you to go to Yankee Stadium and cover the game at Yankee Stadium." I said, "Okay." So the game gets rained out that night. So now the day that I'm supposed to go, they're going to play a day-night doubleheader. So they play in the afternoon. I think the Red Sox had lost that first night, that original night. So now as we go into, let's call it Wednesday, if the Yankees win in the afternoon, win at night, and the Red Sox lose at night, the Yankees wrap up the division. So they say to me, okay, go in the morning, stay for at least for the first game. If they win, you probably stay for the doubleheader. Okay, so I go in the morning, and the Yankees end up winning the game. So now it's 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon. And they say, okay, well, you need to interview somebody to get a one-on-one with somebody for MLB tonight at 6. I said, okay, sure, no problem. So in between games of a doubleheader, the clubhouse is not necessarily bubbling with human beings. Like, these guys are taking showers, maybe taking a nap, grabbing a bite to eat, doing a quick workout to stay warm, doing whatever. They're not by their locker. They're where the media and the rest of us can't get to them. So I'm looking at my clock, and the game ends at, let's say it's 4:30. Clubhouse opens 10 or 15 minutes later. Now we're getting close to 5 o'clock. Who the heck are we going to interview? Got to get that back to New Jersey somehow, someone. So I'm getting nervous. Like, this is the first time, one of the first few times they sent me out for such a big deal. So it's maybe like 5:15 by this time. And one person comes out to meet with the media, and it's Francisco Cervelli, the backup catcher who didn't even play in the first game. So I'm like, this is not the guy we want. For right now. I have to say that very nicely, because Francisco Cervelli now on the Marlins.
Yes.
So I hope to talk to him at some point this year. But so all right. So now it's like 5:30, and Derek Jeter finally comes out and meets with the media. So the media, hungry to talk to anybody, especially him, they go, okay, crowd him. So I'm standing, I'm holding the microphone. I'm looking at my producer on the side. So should I ask him for a one-on-one? He's like, I don't know. Sure. Why not? So that's not how you're supposed to do it. You have to go through the PR people and everything else. And the Yankees, rightfully so, they get a million requests. You're kind of tight with that sort of stuff. So you had to do things the right way. And I think probably in most clubhouses, you're not supposed to do one-on-one interviews. It's just kind of the way it goes. I didn't know that at the time. So he gets done with he's meeting with the media. He does this like 5 minutes. He answers every question. And I'm like right where he's going to walk out. And I say, excuse me, Mr. Jeter, if could I get a couple of extra minutes with you just for a one-on-one? I'm with MLB Network. I said, if you've got to eat or do whatever, I said, that's fine. No big deal. And he's like, he was nice, but he's like, was that not enough? I said, it was great, but we just kind of needed a one-on-one interview. And again, if you're busy, it's fine. So he says, no, that's okay, fine. Meanwhile, in his head, he's probably thinking, where's Jason Zillow, our head of PR, and why is this little idiot talking to me right now? But he didn't formulate that sentence, so that was fine. So I said to my producer, okay, great. He's got the cameras together. I go, you ready? Ready? Everybody ready? Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hey, thanks a lot, Matt. I'm here with Jeter. And I go, you go by Derek Jeter, right? And he goes, yeah. I go, okay, let's do that again. And then so that gets clipped off and runs through MLB Network, probably still to this day, that I got his name wrong. In a sense, J.W., you've done enough highlights to know. You say,
yeah, it's
ball
okay.
gets passed to Stewart. Stewart passes to Severino, and whatever. Yeah. So that's just how it went. So anyway, when I ended up getting the job, one of my bosses at MLB Network said, wow, I'm surprised they hired you, even though you didn't know what the guy's name was. So there was that. And then the Don Mattingly story is my wife, Heather, and my son, Jackson, were at FanFest the first year that I have the job in February of 2018. And I'm walking through the Marlins clubhouse. I'm trying to meet a few people. Spring training hadn't started. I had only gotten the job a couple of weeks prior to that. So I was just trying to meet as many people as I could. So I'm standing there, and I wanted to introduce myself to Don Mattingly. We're outside the clubhouse, and he walks over, and I introduce myself, and I say, hi, I'm Paul, the new play-by-play guy. Hey, nice to meet you. My wife, Heather, and he shakes her hand. And as he's shaking her hand, and my son is next, my son goes, hi, it's nice to meet you. And I go, Jackson, you don't do that. And he goes, no, it's all right. I've got a young son. It's fine. So that's how that went. Now, fast forward 2 years, and I would have lost the job for having spread viruses all over the place. But 2 years ago, it was okay that my son sneezed right in his hand and then shook Don Mattingly's hand. But that's how that went.
Those are great stories, Paul.
Yeah, they are.
You mentioned the coronavirus. Obviously, we've all been affected by it. What's it been like for you? I mean, where were you when the word came down that the season was going to be suspended? And what have you been doing since March?
We lots of family time, which has actually it's been really nice. I think we maybe talked about this before, or you guys are talking about it before I came on. Just you do a lot less now. It's a lot of hanging out with the family, and it's especially in a time of year that we wouldn't normally be doing it. When I was at MLB Network, there was a lot less travel, so I'd be home for stuff. But these last couple of years, I haven't been around for my wife and our anniversary. I was home for that this year. There's just different things that we're able to do on a hot summer day. I don't have 2.5, 3 hours of prep work every day yet. I've done it some, but now I was trying to coach my son, his little league team. No dinners out with the wife, but I try to grill a little bit and, burn some salmon for her or whatever. But, we try to do some of that. So yeah, where was I? We were, I don't know if this was smart or not, but my mom's up in Bristol still, and she just hadn't flown for a long time. So she just didn't need to fly. So she hadn't flown for like 30 years. So she came down March 4th, and then we went to Disney. So like March 6th or whatever it was. And then I had a spring training game. We were going to do 2 spring training games this year on the 11th and the 14th. So the 11th was a Wednesday. We're in Disney all the way up until then. Things are starting to really become, public, I guess, of what was going on. And there was some question as to, how things were going to be handled and everything else. We do the game on the 11th. I go back home, and between the 11th and the 14th, they shut everything down. And my mom was able to fly out on the 13th on that Friday, just ahead of basically lots of flights getting shut down and all that kind of stuff. So the hope was, I guess my naive mind said, okay, fine. There's still a couple of weeks left of spring training. They'll figure this out. They'll start maybe a week late or whatever. There won't be fans. We'll still get all the games in. It'll be kind of a normal year. Well, a lot has certainly changed since then. So yeah, it's been crazy. You try to find new routines. My routine is get up late, have a cup of coffee, do a crossword puzzle, and then try to fill the next 18 hours. That's kind of been the routine. But yeah, I mean, like I said, my wife and I have tried to do some landscaping around the house and trying to stay as busy as we can. And it's been nice. I think she probably wants me to get back to work. I want to get back to work, but this will feel like an internship, 60 games in 66 days. And then I'm off for 6 more months. So it'll be nice. I just hope it's not an unpaid internship like the last 5 I did.
So Paul, it is a 60-game sprint to the finish line. What are your expectations for the Marlins this year?
I think going into a full year, the expectation was that they were going to be a lot better. And really, when you lose 105 games, there's really only one direction to go. But what I've seen in the 2 years that I've been there has been, despite the record, and at the end of the day, it's all about how many runs do you score, wins and losses. It's not about the moral victories. But they have done a terrific job of improving their farm system. And why that's important, farm systems don't win championships, but what farm systems do, especially for a Marlins team and a Marlins franchise that doesn't have, unfortunately right now, a ton of people coming in the ballpark and tons of revenue and high payrolls, is it gives you some cost certainty along the way. So if you can get some of these young pitchers and young infielders and young outfielders on the club, they're making not that much money and they're under team control. So if you can do that and have that pipeline of young talent that can fill up your roster for the most part relatively cheaply, it can get you a long way. And when I started, I think that they were 27th, 28th, 29th, depending on what scouting service you looked at in farm system rankings. They've been as high as 4. I think they were up to 4 after last trade deadline. They had another strong draft this year. They took nothing but pitchers. Last year, they took a lot of position players. So they're building through the draft. But they've improved the farm system. And what they have also done is, and you guys could speak to this too, about building teams. You have to have the right people around when things are not great, right? And I think that what they've done a terrific job is Curtis Granderson's, Cameron Maben's, Neil Walker's, all the guys that they have brought in one way or another these last few years have been the veteran leaders who were not going to be there whenever this thing turns around. But I've said this a million times on the air. Whenever the Marlins get to where they're going to go, those guys and many others, their fingerprints are going to be on where the Marlins are. And it's testament to what the front office has done in Miami and bringing in the right types of people, not just, a guy that's going to hit you 20 home runs and drive in 100 runs, but be a complete jerk. These are guys who are veteran leaders who are going to show these youngsters how to go about your business every single day, prepare yourself every day. But also, baseball is a game of failure. How do you handle that failure? Whether it's an 0 for 3 for yourself, a 10-game losing streak for your team, a 100-loss season for your team. How do you bounce back and get ready to play the next day? And in this 60-game stretch, the expectations are they're going to be in first place on July 23rd when everything starts. And with 2 months left to go, they're in a tough division with a really tough schedule. They'll play the NL East, of course, and they'll play the AL East. So that's the Yankees and the Rays. And who knows what the Red Sox are going to be made of this year. They could be good. They could be have another rough year, but they'll have their hands full for sure. But they have some terrific young pitching that not a lot of people know about, and they're young and they're hungry and they're underdogs, and that can be dangerous. So I'm hopeful that while every game will mean that much more, that they're up to the task. I think that they will be.
Paul, what you just described there as a Royals fan is the history of the Royals. And it's ironic. Fans of the Royals have often talked about the Marlins, the World Series of the Marlins back in the whatever day. And then as a small market, you lose your players and you rebuild. And it's kind of what those teams have to do. It's heartbreaking. You don't get to hold your team together as – J.W. and I've talked about with Chris Berman. I can name the starting lineup of the Royals back in the mid '80s because they were together for 6-7 years at a run. I've got to ask you this again, small world. Brad Ziegler, submarine pitcher for the Marlins, just retired recently. Is from not all that far away from where my family's from, and my youngest son, who's 19, is a submarine pitcher and pretty good one. And actually, Brad spent an afternoon with us one day watching him pitch. And I was catching, and it was just the three of us. And really a neat experience. And Jake leaned on his advice greatly. Through his senior year of high school, his junior and senior year of high school, and as he tries to further his career. Yeah,
again, Brad was another one of those guys. He was there in 18 when my first year there. Was another one of those bullpen leaders. And again, the way that the Marlins kind of built their roster was not just one or two veterans. It was a few veterans in certain spots. He was a veteran leader in the bullpen. The following year, they brought in Sergio Romo, a veteran leader in the bullpen. They've had veteran guys in the pitching staff and all over the place. And again, that's it, because while it is one team, there are also groups that hang out together for workouts or whatever. So you need to have that. And Brad was a terrific guy who had a tremendous career, and whatever the next chapter is for him, I wish him the best.
Yeah, he had one of those long careers.
Yeah.
Submariners can have those.
Yeah, exactly.
So Paul, baseball is going to look a lot different this year. What's your opinions on the DH being used in the National League for starters, and also how they're going to play extra innings when you have a runner automatically on second base starting the 10th inning on?
The DH thing doesn't bother me at all. I've been into the DH. I grew up a Yankee fan, an American League fan, so I'm kind of used to it. I understand that there's the strategy involved in the National League style of game, the no DH style of game. But I think at this time in baseball. While we all love the strategy and the thinking man's game of it, you know, people are not tuning in. People are not coming to the ballpark to watch the starting pitcher bunt in the 4th inning. And they're not sticking around in the 6th when his spot comes up to see if the manager's going to let him keep pitching or pinch hit with his team down a run. Like, we need a little bit more offense in the game, I think. Productive offense. I think overall the game needs a little bit of jolt of action. They talk about it all the time, the 3 true outcomes. The strikeouts, the walks, the home runs, those are all up across the board. The ball's not in play as much. So there's a lot less action. So I'm for the DH. It's probably something that's going to be in baseball across the board when the CBA is up after next season. So I'm fine with that. In terms of the extra inning thing, I don't love it. I guess it's got telling you how much I love the DH, but I guess I'm also kind of a traditionalist as well. But I will say, so I'll preface this also by saying the second Marlins game I did was 17 innings long. So that was day 2. Day 1, here's another funny story. Day 1 is 2018, and the Marlins and the Cubs are the first game of the year. They are the only game in town for like that first hour, and then all the other games start elsewhere. So new job, new ownership, sun's shining, roof is open, new year, new hope, new everything, and we come on the air, and here we go. So excited for the 2018 season to start. Jose Urania with the first pitch of the game to Ian Happ. We're ready to go. Baseball's back in 2018. Here's the pitch. That's a drive to deep right field, and the Cubs have a 1-0 lead. First pitch I call as the voice of the Marlins is a leadoff home run. Yeah. So that was day 1. And then day 2, the Marlins end up playing the Cubs for 17 innings. So, but I like long extra inning games, I guess. It's kind of a battle of attrition, but I also understand the other side of it, the personnel side of it, how, you know, one young pitcher who wears it on a Monday night in a 16-inning game and has to go 4 terrific innings is the first guy who gets sent down to the minor leagues. And his arm, he can't use it for the next few days, so you might as well get a fresh arm in there. So he gets shuttled all over the place. I understand it. I've been fortunate enough to call some WBC games. I think they start in the 11th inning with that runner on second base thing. I think they actually might do first and second in the international game. But regardless, I get it. I get both sides of it. I think it's one of those things that we'll all kind of get used to. Again, it will force some sort of action in extra innings, and I think that's part of the problem in those long extra inning games. It seems like for 3 or 4 innings, everybody's just swinging for the fences trying to end it. And if there's a little bit more strategy or whatever, just put the ball in play, moving runners over, sort of thing that gets forced. I think we'll get used to that kind of quick. It'll be different. It'll be new, but the games shouldn't be that long, and arms will get saved, and especially in a short season. With what we're dealing with now, I think health and all that kind of stuff is at the forefront.
You know, you mentioned several insights into the game. That as a football guy, I enjoy baseball. Both my boys play baseball. I've helped coach baseball as the 4th guy on the bench, just to be the rah-rah guy. Been around it enough and played it for a number of years as a catcher. But having said all that, you know, the strategy behind the National League pitcher and what, I'm not sure everybody would know that. But what really got my attention was, as you talked about, what happens to a pitching staff when it's an extra inning game. And I love minor league baseball. And the way it gets utilized, the average fan isn't aware. We stay fixated on, I'm going to date myself, the George Bretts and the Craig Nettles and the guys who are on the teams forever, the Derek Jeters, the Darryl Strawberries. We don't pay attention to those guys who are on the roster for a few games, go down, come up, maybe come up for part of the year, never to be seen again.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating part of the game. And there's a lot of guys who make their careers doing that, but it's also a heartbreaking part of the game.
It absolutely is. And again, I mean, I don't know if we have to get too far down the road of no minor league baseball this year, but it's one of those elements of the sport that is lost and maybe underappreciated, as you said, to a lot of folks. there's so many more players. In a normal year, it's a 26-man roster that's active every day. It's a 40-man roster that can be part of the big league club. And the teams that win are the teams that are able to utilize that 40-man roster. And sometimes that, unfortunately for some, is their role, is that guy who's, the long relief guy, or that utility player who has one job and, you're a defensive replacement. You're a pinch runner late. You're a guy who only pitches when we're up or down by 7 runs. But those guys are the ones that can really help the club quite a bit. They don't get the headlines. They don't get the money. They don't, sometimes they don't get the charter flights. They're back on the commercial flights back and forth in the minor leagues. But those are extremely valuable players throughout the course of a major league season. There's no doubt.
I know we're running short on time, but I wanted to get one more question in before we let you go, Paul. Dr. Z mentioned he's coached his kids in sports. Your son Jackson plays Little League. You're a coach on his team. How would you describe your coaching style, Paul?
Encouraging, surprisingly. I try to be an encouraging coach. I'm not just saying that. I think that he's 9 years old. So again, for as competitive as South Florida is with sports, I don't think that there are many scouts in the stands at the rec league baseball games. So my goal for him and the other kids on the team has just been make sure that they have some kind of fun so that they want to come back to the next practice or the next game, ultimately the next season, and just try to make it fun. He had one season recently. I did not coach on that team. They already had their folks set up, so I didn't coach on the team. But it wasn't the best experience, I guess I could say. And it was more so. It was his first season at kid pitch, so he was doing coach pitch, and then he was his first year at kid pitch. 9-year-old kids don't always know where the ball's going, and yet it's still coming in at 1,000 miles an hour. So it's daunting. It's a little scary. So he was intimidated. There's no question about it. I'm sure the 10-year-olds, when they were 9, they were intimidated. But it was one of those things where he didn't get a lot of the attention that he would have needed, not to be the star of the team, but just so that he had the fun, so that he learned, like, again, when you're in youth sports, let's say baseball, for example, a lot of times the kids who are a little less skilled at a certain time are playing in the outfield. Well, my whole thing is that's the way it goes, but make sure as a coach that you're making those outfielders better outfielders. There was a practice a couple of weeks ago, and our coach just kind of set up sort of like scrimmage sort of thing, and he had 3 kids rotating hitting, and when they had 6 outs, basically 2 innings worth, and everybody would rotate, and everybody was playing different positions. And every time that a new pitcher was going and warming up, I'd bring the outfielders over and I'd try to say, okay, guys, here's our role. There's nobody behind us. You got to make sure you stop the ball. Like, all of those, just the little things to help. If little Johnny's going to play the outfield because maybe it's his first season or he can't really throw all that well or is not the best kid to catch, okay, great. But teach him how to play the outfield. Get to the ball, get it in quick, get it to the second baseman, get it to the shortstop, whatever, and let them do the next thing. You can't control where they throw it afterwards. If they overthrow the catcher, do it. Stop the ball, get it in. It's those little things, and try to have fun and encourage, make sure. I was, again, fortunate at MLB Network to work with Bill Ripken, a great friend of mine. And obviously, Bill knows a lot about the intricacies, the nuances of baseball, being part of that family. And one thing that he always told me whenever we'd work together and watch games and do kinds of stuff, he'd say, there's always something to do for everyone on every play. And he'd also say, if you do all the little things right, you never have a big thing to worry about. So I tried to impart some of that on these kids, like the left fielder who's sitting there and he's just like chewing his fingernails. It's like, okay, but there's something for you to do. I said, even on a ball that's hit to the second baseman, at this level, there's overthrows all the time. So as a left fielder, a ball hit to the second baseman, the ball's way over there. You don't have a play, right? Or do you? Because when that second baseman overthrows the first baseman And then the first baseman, or hopefully right fielder, has to go chase that ball down and overthrows second. Well, the center fielder should be backing that up. But then when that happens and they throw to third, the left fielder better be behind third base. So there's something for you to do on every single play. And that might happen once out of 100. But that one time when that ball gets overthrown on third and you're there to back it up and keep that runner from scoring, you're going to get so many cheers from the dugout, from your parents, that you're going to feel proud of yourself, that even on a play that you thought you had nothing to do with, you make the play that helps to save us a run. So, I try to encourage it. And then I make the kids run 75 laps, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, I know we're just about out of time here, but I wanted to thank you, Paul, for being on the show today. I've said this to you in emails over the years as we've corresponded and kept in touch. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for what you've accomplished in your professional career, but more importantly, I'm proud of who you are as a human being. And that was evident during our time together at ESPN, and certainly that's still the case now. So we wish you the best of luck. Thanks for being with us on the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast. And the next time you're in Connecticut visiting during the off season and when things settle down a little bit, you're always welcome at the University of New Haven, Paul.
Excellent. Fantastic. I appreciate it, guys. This was fun. Good to chat. Good to reconnect, J.W. And again, I know I've said this too, but thank you for everything that you've done for me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, buddy. It's happy to do it. And like I said, we pay it forward, right? And you're doing the same thing now too with the younger generation. So we look forward to seeing you on TV. Have a great season. Best of luck to you and the Marlins this year.
Thank you, Dr. Z. Good to talk with you, pal.
Take care. You're a great storyteller. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
That is Paul Severino, the TV play-by-play voice of the Miami Marlins on Fox Sports Florida. A good friend of mine and a good friend of our show here, Dr. Z. And again, we only have a few minutes left, but final thoughts as we wrap things up for today.
I kind of referenced it there. It's interesting. Any guest you interview, it takes on a flavor of its own and a path of its own. And what I enjoyed with Paul was he really does tell good stories, and really connected with so many of his career. Even though we have different career paths in the industry, I want to keep pointing out to our younger viewers that there's no one distinct career path to any of our jobs. If you want to be in this business, they all zigzag. As I've said, my father taught me many times, be a rat in a maze, but you have to prepare. You have to get your foot in the door. You have to get that opportunity. And usually your early opportunities are volunteer, as all of us did. And the money will come, as my dad also said, but prepare for when, get your foot in the door, take advantage of the opportunity, and then go from there.
You were the driver of your own career, as Ayanna Duncanson told us in our previous podcast earlier in the week. And when you do these internships or volunteer, you get your foot in the door, as you mentioned, you prepare. That's how you make these connections. That's these connections, as Paul told us, that ultimately, can lead to a big-time job. And Paul has one of the biggest big-time jobs in sports, one of 30 TV play-by-play guys for a major league team. So that's pretty impressive.
That's right.
Yep. So it was great. I'm glad we had a chance to reconnect with him. And Dr. Z, a pleasure as always being with you. And our thanks to our presenting sponsor, the Pink Clover Foundation, to our executive producer, John Mays. We appreciate all his help. He is the true brains behind the operation here. Broccoli Rob Thompson, our producer. And for Dr. Z, I'm J.W. Thanks for watching the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast. We'll see you next time.